Okay, this is a bonefish fly that I call the Caicos Critter, which is a fly that I tied for bonefish fishing down in Turks and Caicos, and it actually has been used in Mexico, and I've sent it with some friends to the Bahamas, and it's just done particularly well for me. It's a standard type pattern, but it's got a few little interesting little elements to it that make it particularly interesting. Now, I'm using a mustad hook here. I use Gamakatsu hooks quite often and find that they're great, but these mustad hooks seem to do a really good job and are certainly a lot less expensive, and I've just not had one fail on me. So I have no trouble with using those. And then I'm using a pink flat wax nylon thread here. It's just a nice, strong thread. It's great for tying saltwater patterns, and lays down real flat, so you can really use quite a bit of it on the fly if you need to, which I find is kind of necessary. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is attach some bead chain eyes to this hook, and the way that I do this I think is really important because it's critical that you get these eyes so they're very, very secure on there. And what I'm going to do is attach this a little more than 1/8 of an inch behind the eye of the hook. If we get too close to the eye of the hook here, you're going to have a lot of trouble with crowding as you're tying this fly. So I'm going to make a little bunch of thread right here, and then I'll move my thread back excuse me, and make another little bunch right there. So I've got a little bit of a valley in there in which I'm going to stick the eye. And although there's all sorts of colors of bead chain eyes, I think you probably could use any of them. I really like the black. It just seems like it looks like, much more similar to a crayfish or not a crayfish, a shrimp or a crab. And I put those eyes right in that little valley that I made with those two bunches of thread, and then I'm going to figure 8 over top of those several times. Now you'll notice that as you go over top of the back and forth over those eyes, you're going to get thread that goes just like so. And what I need to do to really tighten that up is now take the thread around the eyes, and I can pull real tight, and that's going to snug those X's that I made with that thread in there. And now those eyes are really on there tight. And then what I'll often do is take a little bit of glue, either some Zap-A-Gap, or I've got a little bit of this Hard as Hull, which is just a good head cement, and I'll just dab some in there. So that will just act as a little bit of extra security. Oftentimes when those bonefish eat these flies, they will get that in their crushers and it'll twist the eyes, and it's just awfully nice if that doesn't happen. So I've got those eyes on there, and they're very secure. Now I'm going to move my thread towards the bend of the hook, and I've got it hanging so it's about in between the point and the barb of the hook. And now I'm going to add some rubber legs. And what I'm going to do is I'm using these, it's the nymph size silly legs, so it's a smaller version of the standard silly legs, which I really like because they have an awful lot of action to them. And I'm just going to grab 2 of them and remove them from this whole bunch. And rubber legs are something that wasn't always used on standard bonefish flies, but I find that they really are helpful. They add quite a bit of action. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab these tips of the rubber legs. I've got the whole strand here in my hand, and I'm just going to tie these right in at the back of the hook, and I'm going to bring them out and let them, I guess, get the length that I want, and then cut it off right there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add another bunch of 2 right on top. So I'm going to have 4 legs there, and these end up acting like the antenna, more than likely, of a shrimp or a crab. And so we end up having 4 legs back there. The next step is going to be to add some dubbing for a body. And I use, for this, this UV ice dub. This is the tan color. And I've used the UV dub for a lot of things. I've found that it has absolutely no advantage for trout flies. It may, but in my experience it has not done anything for me. But with the bonefish flies, it does seem that these fish will really move for the flies that have the UV flash tied into them. So there may be something to it. And now I'm just going to dub this onto the thread. And I'm putting it on there pretty good bunches here. I want to have a decent sized body, leaving it kind of fuzzy. And now I'm just going to go ahead and wrap a good body right up towards the eyes here. I'll add a little bit more. I'm going to really pack it right in there between the eyes, and then I'm going to go right over, make a little X with that. Actually, I need just a little bit more. And that fills that right in. Okay. Now I'm tying on this Regal vise right here, which is not a true rotary vise. So if I turn it over, it's going to actually be facing straight up, which is not ideal. A Renzetti is much better for tying a fly like this. So when I'm stuck with this vise, what I need to do is actually take the fly out of the vise and turn it over and stick it right in there. If I can get it. There's a little groove. And now it's parallel to the table once again, and I'm ready to go. The next thing I'm going to do is add this wing to it, and I'm using a material called gator hair here, which is a really nice, tough synthetic material that makes great wings on bonefish flies. And I'm going to pull out a nice little bunch like so, trim that off, and I'm going to tie that right in so it's fairly long, just a little bit longer than the hook itself. And I'll tie that right in directly on top of the hook, right in front of the eyes. And that sits right there, and then I'll trim the butt ends off just like so. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some red fox body hair to the top of this, which is not entirely necessary, but I think it makes the fly look real lifelike in the water. And fox hair is great hair for tying flies that you use this type of stuff on, because the hairs are all equally long. And so there's not a lot of, when you trim a bunch of it, a lot of it isn't going to pull out. So I'm going to go in here and trim a bunch of that. It's also got a great color to it. Now I'll pull some of the guard hairs out, and I'm going to add a bunch of that right on top, just a little bit shorter than that gator hair that I tied in. Okay, so now I've got this bunch on there, and I'll get right in close and trim that short. And you can see it's very important to have sharp scissors so you can keep it nice and neat in there. The next step is to add some of this UV pearl crystal flash to it. And I really think that this does make a big difference on these bonefish flies. It seems to just gather light even when it's a little bit cloudy. I'm going to go ahead and trim a small bunch of that, probably 4 or 5 strands, and I'm going to put that right on top, more or less the same length as the other 2 materials that I tied in there. And they're directly on top. Go in and neaten that up. Then the last thing is I'm going to grab these legs again, the same color as I used for the tail. And what I will do is I'm going to leave about 2 inches or so hanging out in front of my fingers here, and I'm going to tie these in directly in front of the eyes, loosely so I can move them around. But they're right in front of the eyes here, and then I can go back and trim it to the length I want on this side. Then I can take these and pull them right across and tie them in so that they're right above that eye on the other side. And now the rest of it is simply neatening up this head. And you can see that it's important to have a fair amount of room because we tied enough materials in there. And there we have it. And I'll just whip finish it, and we'll be done. Now the last step is simply just putting some head cement on here, and it's real important tying saltwater flies that use something that's very tough. I use this hard as hull, which is basically a heavy-duty nail polish type thing, and I really coat that. That vise is squeaky. And make sure that it's really well coated, and that's just going to keep that tough and keep it from falling apart. And there you have it.